and this is a URL. This entire thing is a URL. So anything that contains HTTP, www something. Okay, so this is URL. So to define a domain name, how can we define a domain name? It is a unique name, right? So it is a unique name of a web that is fetched from the internet. If it is available, you will get the response. If the domain name is not available, it is not mapped to any of the backend servers, you will not get it. You will not get any response, right? So the domain name should be valid, actually. It should exist. So usually your browser will have a local database here. We call it cache. We are including all the things here, like how exactly the request works. So first of all, when you type something in your browser, like, okay, I have typed AMA. So it is fetching me Amazon.in. So how does it know that I wanted to go to Amazon.in website, because this is getting it from the local database of your browser. It will be stored on your operating system, right? So all these, the frequently visited websites on your browser will be stored in your local operating system. We call it as browser cache. So if I clear the history and the cache of my browser will not know if, it will not suggest me anything, right? So this is the first level of fetching the resources. So when you type in this URL, so what does it get? It gets the resources. So it may be anything, web resource. So this is my resource. This is a resource, right? So I'm getting this resource as a response to my URL, right? So domain name, it is a unique name. I cannot buy one more domain like Amazon.in. No, you cannot buy that. So once it is given to one user, you cannot buy the same name. So this domain name is the identification of your application. So how do you check this identification? Go to the certificate. You can see here Amazon.in, and this belongs to Amazon organization. So Amazon did not place any organization or organization unit, but yes, the domain name represents the identification. Okay, so URL, if you earlier, way back, if you give only the domain name, it will not fetch the content from the internet. You should give like something like www. The domain name, then only it would, like I am saying, like way back, like 20 years ago, 20 or 25 years ago. So now it has got evolved. If you type in, so why is it taking only HTTPS? Because the backend configuration is done like to redirect. Even if I type, it will get redirected to HTTPS only. So that internet, if you want to access something over the internet, there are only two protocols available, that is HTTP and HTTPS. So if any, according to the guidelines of IT departments of each country around the world, it has made mandate to use HTTPS, especially for the financial applications or e-commerce where the money transactions are involved. like insurance projects, UPIs, payment gateways, e-commerce, stock markets. There are many things. So two protocols, HTTP and HTTPS. So even if I give HTTP, it will get redirected to HTTPS, and this will be our URL. So what happens at the DNS server? What exactly is a DNS? This is domain name server. So its job is to fetch, look up the mapped IP or host name where your application is hosted. Okay, so we know that it is not hosted on load balancer, but yes, uh, when I send this URL, the DNS server will extract the domain name, and the LB team or the network team in your organization, they will map the domain name with the client facing server, or you can also call it front end server. In this architecture, what is a client facing server? Load balancer, but the user does not know. I don't know whether this page, it is coming from the load balancer or a web server or a Jboss, WebLogic, WebSphere, Tomcat, or it is getting executed on the Kubernetes or Docker or OpenShift. I don't know anything. I am just a user, but in the back end, uh, that is what we do. We design, we architect, orchestrate, we do a lot of things, right? We configure a lot of things. So the first thing is there will be a search box here, a small search box where in your organization, your network team will map the domain name with the front end server. So it may have got the IP as 1.1.1.1. So if I type amazon.in in the browser, it goes to DNS, and from the DNS it will fetch to which IP amazon.in is mapped, 1111. So simply the request goes to this one. Okay, load balancer. So it may be a hardware or a software. I don't know how the hardware load balancer will be mapped with these two web servers details, but software load balancer, if you take example like OCI or Elastic load balancer or Nginx, yes, we can do the configuration. Uh, Everything will be GUI. You will define the public IPs, you will define the port numbers, you will make it active or active passive. I'm sorry. Yeah. So all those things will be done by the load balancer team. So if you belong to the load balancer team, you know how to do it. Right? So at the load balancer, so what is the job of a load balancer? Any points?
Distribute the load.
Distribute the load, exactly. And anything?
Helps in failover.
Exactly. Failover. And
For certificates, SSL certificates as well.
exactly. SSL, we call it SSL termination. Right. So these are the, it is actually it is recommended, but yes, mandatory also. Now, and it acts as a proxy also, proxy server. So distributing the load, yes, we know it will distribute. If there are 100 requests, 50 here, 50 here. So out of these 50, it will distribute based on the load balancing algorithm. It will send 2, 2, 2, 2, again 2, 2, 2, 2. So the same goes with the web server 2 as well, right? So load balancer, it distributes the load, and if it finds any service in the backend, yeah, load balancer here, the web server, app server IPs or host names will be configured. Or, uh, yeah, WLL, workload management, also failover. Right. So failover, we know if one is down, it will simply identify and it will stop sending requests to web server 2 and it will route all the requests, all the traffic to web server 1. So how does it know if a web server 2 is down? Because it uses, it may use TCP continuously, every frequent interval of time it sends TCP requests over TCP protocol and it will get the response. So it thinks that, okay, this is alive. So failover, yeah, active, 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 passive, whatever it is. SSL termination. Actually, LB are good with SSL. What exactly is SSL termination? So you will install certificates here. And if you don't install SSL certificates on application servers or web servers, that is fine. HTTPS requests reach load balancer and the load balancer will present the server certificate to the client, right? It presents the server certificate to the client, and once the SSL handshake is established, this URL, once it reaches the load balancer, it will route the request to the any of the web servers. It may be HTTP or it may be HTTPS. It depends upon your configuration on web server. So if you don't enable SSL, that is fine. If you enable SSL, it is good. Okay. So from the load balancer to web servers. And what is happening here is if the SSL is handled by the LBs or web servers, the SSL termination load will be reduced on the back end. Actually, it is a burden, right? So extract the exact URL and it will extract the domain name and whatever it is after the domain name, it gets routed to the exact application server where your application is deployed. So what happens is behind, if you are accessing an application with the HTTPS URL, what is involved in HTTPS SSL termination? Encryption and decryption, right? Encryption and decryption. This encryption and decryption process will be handled by the load balancer or web servers. If you don't have a load balancer in the front end, it will be handled by web servers. So these two components, actually, these two types of components are very good with SSL termination. So this encryption and decryption process, encryption, decryption, it is a burden actually, because for each new request, the server has to present the server certificate to the client so that the encrypted communication starts between the two entities, right? So in between, the attacker, if the attacker uh, intervenes with your request, he cannot decrypt because there are multiple uh, ciphers that will be used. So we'll get to these concepts when we get to the SSL part. But yes, these two components are very good with SSL termination. Even if you don't configure or install the certificates on the application servers, that is fine. If you don't enable SSL uh, port numbers on application servers, what happens is your uh, LB, or web server will re-encrypt the request and route to the. So that is what happens. So the next component is application server. So we have discussed about application server. And one more thing here, one more point to add is sticky sessions. Load balancer, it manages sticky sessions. What is a sticky session? So let us think. I have accessed this URL. The load balancer is sending my request to web server 1, and web server 1 has forwarded it to app server 1. And after that, I have clicked on mobiles. So this URL, I have established a session, right? Actually, I have established a session with the server. So then my next request is mobile phones. So the load balancer will know that you have first clicked access this URL, and after that in the same session you are requesting for mobile phones. So it will route the request to web server 1 only. It will not route it to web server 2. And your web server 1, again, it also knows that you have already established a session with the application server 1 and you are requesting for mobile phones. So it will send the request to app server 1 only. It will not send it to the other server unless this app server is down. Then only it will route your session to other application servers. So that is called sticky sessions. Load balancers and web servers are good with sticky sessions as well. All right. Now your application server, we have already discussed, like it has two components, that old story, web container, EJB container. If it is a servlet, JSP, your web container will execute the request and send it back, send the response back to the user. And if it is an EJB request, so the EJB container will execute or process the request. In between, if it needs a database connection, anyhow you would have already created the data sources, right? So your data source, for each data source map, there will be a connection pool, and your data source will get a connection object which is a predefined connection. Predefined. So you will give, right, while creating a data source, you will mention minimum connections and maximum connections. One connection pool can provide you with a excuse me. So based on the maximum number of connections, timeout values, timeout for to obtain a connection from the connection pool, you will tune all those things in the data source. So based on the available connection objects from the connection pool, the connection will be obtained by your request, and it will establish a connection with the database. It may be Oracle or so in the applications, uh, in the application properties file, or you know, the deployment descriptors, it will be mentioned to connect to which database. You know, the JNDI name you will mention while creating a data source, correct? So using that JNDI name, your JNDI name will contain your database host, IP, and the port number and the database service name. So using those details, it will connect with the backend database, and it will complete the transaction, execute the query or the stored procedure or triggers, whatever it is. Once it is done, the connection that is obtained, once it completes the transaction, it goes back to the connection pool, releases the connection object for reusability, and your request will be back again. So if that request has still anything after getting the required data from the database, it will execute again. Your application server will process the further resources required, then it will present you the response. For example, if I log in and my login credentials are stored in MySQL, those username and password will be validated by the MySQL. If the query is run successfully, then I will be logged into the welcome page. So it will process application server. Once the validation is complete at the MySQL, if it is success, then application server will present you with the response. Which response you will log in, the login, not login page, the welcome page with your name, right? And it will show all the details like your product history, the orders you have placed, whatever, your wish list, everything. So this is a typical request flow, and still there are many things actually. So there will be how, if I'm requesting for mobile phones, how exactly the mobile phones related Java code is getting executed. So your applications will have something. Yeah, these are the sample applications that we'll be using in our practical sessions. So if yeah, this is supermarket application. I have extracted the war file. So it contains two directories. So WebINF. If it is a web application, you will go into WebINF, and it contains one deployment descriptor. So we will understand what is a deployment descriptor, very important. So if you open this, it contains the URL mappings with the servlets, right? So if item admin login, right? So it is URL pattern. So you are requesting some resource, then it will pick up this servlet. This is a servlet name from the application code, right? So if you see the classes, it contains somewhere like the same, where is it? DS and maybe something. Somewhere it contains in these classes. These are the Java classes. Okay. So from this class, the code will be picked and executed by your application server. So this deployment descriptor describes about your deployment. If you are a new user, which servlet should be executed. If you are an employee of a supermarket application, you will log in with the employee details and you will get all the employee details. So that code will be that particular module will be executed, right? So this is just a sample. Actually, this deployment descriptor will be very large and it may contain many details, the user roles and the security details and the session details, the cookies and whatever the developer wants to write it, he will define it finally in the deployment descriptor. So based on that deployment descriptor, your request, the application code will be executed and it will be sent as response back to the user yeah browser. Clear?